This identification is on the square deal, which was really created by Theodore Roosevelt, which is quite a bit of discussion about him in the textbook also. Roosevelt was an important figure in U.S. history. Um, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., as I mentioned before, he was uh, a soldier in the Spanish-American War and got some notoriety from that. Uh, so a little bit about Roosevelt before we go into the facts of the square deal. He was himself born in 1858 and died in 1919. Um, yeah, so Roosevelt was in the military, and then but as a child, I think it's important to know that he grew up he was homeschooled because he was ill. As a child, he had asthma, and he became a physical fitness buff to fight that asthma. He became very interested in the outdoors, which became a very much a part of his policies when he would later become president. Um, his protection of the outdoors. So he would ride horses, weightlift, travel, hunt. He had a very, very strong interest in the outdoors, which many people attribute to historians to his goals in protecting wildlife, in protecting land for wildlife in the United States. So he went into politics in New York, and he eventually, at this time of corruption in the police department, he became commissioner of the police department on the promise of cleaning up all the corruption. He was actually very successful cleaning up corruption um, in the police department. So he eventually became president when McKinley. He was vice president of McKinley when McKinley was assassinated. Um, Roosevelt became president, and then ran for a term as office. And the slogan he ran for was the Square Deal. That was his big platform to appeal to Americans. Was the Square Deal. Um, and being a Republican, he was the branch of the Republican Party that was considered progressive. There were progressive movements in the Democrat Party, which was changing quite a bit at that time. And then there was progressive movements within the Republican Party. And instead of by this time, business was becoming big in the Republican Party, pro-business platforms. But Roosevelt was in the progressive wing of the Republican Party, like kind of the break-off wing, and very much supported progressive ideas um, at this time. So when he ran for president, he said, "I want a square deal for every man." And so um, now we can talk about that. He was very much an independent type. He was for women's rights. We talked about Booker T. Washington before, and he was very close and friends with Booker T. Washington, who had started the African American Tuskegee Institute. So he met with him, um, and he was very committed to starting a national forest, many different national forests. Okay, so yeah, this was just before he became president. He was still um, the commissioner of police in this picture. But the issues of this day was expanding cities, corruption in the police department, problems with the food sanitation supplies, many progressives calling for reform in mining. And one of the biggest issues was getting rid of ending child labor, which was very controversial, as it should have been. So these were just some of the big issues that he wanted to address with what he called the square deal. You see here the square deal. So the main points of the Square deal was controlling corporations or corporate abuse or corporations who were having workers work for too low wages or too long of working hours. So Roosevelt was saying instead of just depending on unions, we're going to have some laws now to regulate corporations and to stop monopolies from corporations from driving other businesses out of business and taking them over. So another part of the Square deal was protecting the environment. The third part was consumer protection, um, such as safety measures in food processing, safety measures for workers, um, rein in abuse by big business. Pure food was a huge issue at this time, and he promised to make laws for proper sanitation for food, and and finally also to try and fight corruption in business and corruption in government. So he was very popular with a broad group of Americans. He had a boisterous personality. He had slogans. He was a very outgoing person. Again, his Square Deal was his primary plan, and he did enact many policies when he was president to bring about a Square Deal. Yeah, so that's Teddy Roosevelt and the Square Deal. He actually did not run again um, in the following term, but 4 years later, he did run again. But the traditional Republicans rejected him, the leadership. So he ran in his second attempt to be president. So he ran as an independent in the Bull Moose Party. So then you had the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, and his party, the Bull Moose Party. But in American history, third parties just don't do it. Um, so he lost that election.